The meeting has been posted according to open meeting laws.
Contrary to my view of the clock. All right, thank you. Roll call.
President Johnson.
Here.
Trustee Vernucci. Here. Commissioner Leaderhouse.
Here.
Commissioner Morath. Here. Commissioner Seeger.
Here.
Thank you.
Sorry, give me 1 second. I got to get the... I'm not going to read the whole thing. Do you guys want to say anything during citizen participation? Go ahead. I mean, that's what, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Tom Senf, 2141 Church Street. In regard to the Oak Ridge Cemetery, I know you've been working on a lot of things in regard to it, and we have. I guess just to repeat something to you, some of the paperwork that came through the village board and with Ray Gooden, the one item, the plan does not result in substantial or undue adverse impact on nearby property, the character of the neighborhood. As often as we've been here discussing with you, it does involve a lot of impact. I guess right now the biggest thing with Lot 1, as far as the tree removal, the paperwork that was submitted, signed by Ray Gooden to the board, does the proposed project involve any of the following? And one of them was removal of over 25% of the present trees. Now, I didn't go out there and count the trees before this was done. Nobody knew what was going to happen. But rough measurement, Lot 1, we're talking 500 feet of frontage by the cemetery. So 25% of that would have been only 125 feet could have been removed. How many trees that involves, I don't know. So 375 feet, trees should not have been removed. So in other words, his removal was way over what was stated in the paperwork by him and by the board. So appreciate you working on everything. Possibly the best thing to do would be if the board, your board, our board could get together with Ray and let's get this done so you don't have to work, discuss it anymore. We don't have to, Ray doesn't have to. Let's get it done. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Did you have his email?
About getting together?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got
Okay.
that. Towards the end of the week, I've been gone the last few
Okay,
days.
yeah, if you can respond back, then I'll find some time for us to get together.
Okay.
Thank
good.
you. Any other comments during citizen participation? Tom? Okay. Going once? Going twice? Okay. We'll close citizen participation. Orin, can you hit the button for me, please? Thank you. All right, we'll move on to approval of minutes from September 16th.
Make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
A second.
Any questions or discussion? All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Miscellaneous business is none. We'll move on to ordinance, code, and amendments. Item 1, ordinance 2024-16 to amend the village's zoning regulations, Chapter 510, regarding planned developments. I will go ahead and open the public hearing. This is you see the draft resolution in your packet. Eileen, do you want to kind of just remind us exactly what we're doing here?
Yeah, so there was some conflicting language in the code regarding the final plan development district approval process. It said it followed the site plan approval process, which in that case, for site plan commission has final approval authority. That is not a recommendation to the village board. However, when we looked at the, for lack of a better word, the sunset date on the approval, which was in section E of that ordinance, it referred to the village board's approval as the expiration date. So it had said 5 years from village board approval. So we changed that to plan commission after discussing it with the village board. They said, they wished for it to remain as what they felt the intent was, that the Plan Commission would have that final approval authority. As a reminder, there's 3 steps to a plan development district. We have the preliminary or conceptual review, and then we have the general review. At that point, the Plan Commission has their public hearing, and there's a recommendation to the village board. So at that step is when the village board does review it. So this change is just clarifying that. We did add language. I discussed it with our attorney. We had talked about, we have a particular situation where we have a development agreement that actually allows a development to extend beyond the 5 years. And in speaking with our attorney, he said that's not unusual for some large plan development districts to take a longer period of time. So there is some language added here that we had not discussed at the last meeting when I had updated the Plan Commission on this, that does say if there is existing development agreement that's been authorized by the village, there would be a later date allowed. Otherwise, it expires in 5 years, and they'd have to come back for an extension from the Plan Commission if they so wished.
I will make a motion.
Hang on.
Oop,
We're
Sorry.
technically in a public hearing. All these people could have something to say about this. I'm assuming that you're, yeah. So I'm assuming there are no questions or discussion on this, and since there's nobody here, I will close the public hearing. Now, please go ahead.
I will make a motion to approve ordinance 2024-16. Do you want me to name the correction or the addition that's on?
Well, it's a recommendation of the village board.
The recommendation of the village board then from Article 51084, paragraph B, subparagraph 2, that the final development proposal will be approved by the Plan Commission rather than the village board.
I'll second that.
All right, any questions or discussion on the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 2, discussion related to amending the village's zoning regulations. Again, we're in Chapter 510 regarding food trucks. So we've talked about this a few times. We have Oren's memo here, kind of updating us and giving us in the packet some examples from various other municipalities. This is really more about food trucks on private property, correct? Because we have an establishment that would like to have a food truck on their property.
Correct. That was the, the scope of what my predecessor had prescribed a code amendment for, and was based on that request. So the information that I've provided in the packet from a few different sources, you'd already seen what Tim had provided from 3 different places. So I just went a little bit further. What is the county up to? And I've got the information in here from when they took a look at this back in 2021. They had some existing things on the book, and they were talking about adding additional requirements. So that's in here now. So from Tim, you've got something from Madison as an example, something from Oak Creek, and something from West Bend. Now you've got the example of what is going on with the county for the areas where their zoning jurisdiction lies. And then I also included an example from a different end of the spectrum, Menominee Falls, who just treats these as under their temporary use regulations. And essentially they have a special event type permit that's required. And so that's how they're handled there. They need to get the special event permit, and it says that, they're allowed for this certain type of events. They recognize that there's a need for them. So the village recognizes special events organized by individuals, private organizations, and nonprofits serve an important role in enhancing the village's quality of life and can provide benefits to the community as a whole. These special events include outdoor seasonal sale lots with or without a structure, as well as food truck activity on village property. So theirs is specifying on village property. They're not necessarily cutting them loose into the community to set up shop on streets or anything like that. The next example is the village of Sussex, which has a very robust licensing process, and they are allowing food trucks on certain streets in that municipality. in addition to on private property with written permission, and is allowed by the Parks and Recreation Department for the farmers market and special events. So they're covering all the different angles of how you can do this, and they're injecting themselves fully into the process by being the entity that licenses and inspects. So this example from Sussex would be the all-in example. If you want to have control over all aspects of it, you would come up with your own licensing process. Even if you have a license, let me just go back, you don't have to do this. The state does, DATCAP is the inspecting entity for Walworth County. So under their example, if you go to their page, and that's the image, which you can't see really great on my report, but that's where you end up if you try to track the licensing through Walworth County, is you go to their license establish requirements, and they link you to DATCAP, and that's the entity that does the food truck licensing, or any restaurant, for that matter, in the county. And so when Tim was prescribing the language that you saw in his materials from the last time this was talked about, so this would have been his staff review for the July 12th, 2023 Plan Commission meeting. He's got in there a definition, which is good, I agree with it, and then some standards. I think the question to discuss tonight is, do you want this to be a new land use description? And is it going to be a temporary use, or is it going to be a standalone use that is, and where do you want to allow it, and how do you want to allow it? As a permitted use, a conditional use, again, or a temporary use? And you've got examples of how that's happening in different communities in different ways. So as an example, in the Madison example, they're allowing these as a permitted use if you're meeting certain conditions, within, if you're farther than 200 feet from a residential property boundary, it's a permitted use, subject to the standards that are in the code. If you're less than that, then it's a conditional use. So that's how they're set up. Again,
Does that include somebody hiring them for a private party? For like a wedding reception?
theirs is on private property, and I guess that,
It's in a residential area, that's what I was asking.
I don't think it contemplates that, no.
Okay.
I don't know what necessarily precludes that. I mean, the whole point of these is that, and I've worked with municipalities that did want to inspect every time they were in the community. It's hard to keep track of where they're going to be and when, and the state isn't doing inspections every time they're out somewhere.
I don't think that we have the resources to inspect every single time there's a food truck in our community. And I think that a conditional use gives us a lot more flexibility in what we want to do with this as well, doesn't it?
Doing a conditional use would allow you to apply conditions to the approval. I think the problem with that is that it's going to limit what the food truck folk want, which is they want to be able to pop up wherever the action is, where there's going to be able to be people for them to sell to. And they want, the whole point is these are mobile and they want the flexibility.
So we look at
But-
that temporary being a better one?
Well, how you approve this doesn't have to dictate necessarily, that flexibility, especially when you're dipping a toe in the water and just seeing how this goes, If you just want to address the private property standpoint, if somebody gets if you do it as a conditional use, I don't see an issue with that. You'd still have these standards, but I guess my point is you can have the standards whether it's a permitted use or a conditional use. You guys have land use standards for uses that are permitted. So, it could be either. The conditional use process would allow you to add other ones based on things that could come up with a specific property.
I get my concern, I've heard of people who, I don't know, personally, I don't know if I'd have one, but some people had a wedding reception party at their house, they had a food truck there. And if we had some kind of rule that would preclude that from, in residential areas, then that might be a sticky situation. But you said, we could probably have conditional uses then, if that would work. But I don't think we should say, no, you can't have that here.
Well, I think our conditional use would apply to a commercial situation where somebody's going to be coming back, a repeat presence, And the standards as presented, if you look at those from Tim, they do include in there there's I think something triggering it to be removed at the end of the day.
Bottom, overnight storage?
Yeah, a motor vehicle trailer or push cart must not be kept overnight on the same property where it is operated during the day. So that's H. So the idea is that it's not just a loophole to building a brick and mortar. You can't just set up shop and have it there all the time. You're gonna bring it there when you're, gonna sell, and then it's gonna go away. In the Sussex example, they actually say that they're limiting it to 4 hours at a location out of a 24-hour period, which is, I don't know if that's enough, but
I don't think that's enough.
They-
I did that when Elkhorn did their food truck event on their square, I guess
Yeah.
you'd call it. That was 8 hours, I think it was, of food trucks, so.
Well, right now, when we have events, we consider the food trucks covered under the event permit. So that's what's allowing the food truck nights. So, we could continue doing it that way, is on a public street, it's only allowed with an event permit, and you're not allowing, so that's something the Plan Commission could consider. But going back to Forty's comment, one of the examples did talk about that, and it had said in the example that it was excluding those type of uses as long as they're not selling to the public. And then one of them also had a limitation, like only once every 90 days or something. So like if I'm going to have a birthday party or graduation party at my house and have a food truck in June, then I got to wait 90 days before I do it again. So you could choose to add something like that to allow for it, but make sure it's not something unreasonable.
And in those situations, you are prepaying a certain amount for them to come out. And so it is, I'm guaranteeing I'm going to spend this much money with you to feed my guests, and it is just for the private entity of that lot.
It's a different type of catering.
Different type of catering.
I'm inclined that whatever we go to here, as you said, Orrin, that we're kind of dipping our toe in this, that we're not too heavy-handed in this approach, that we're trying to envision every eventuality here. We have people who might want to put one, I think at a gas station or a restaurant wanting to operate it. I know this is in the town, but the Hive, they regularly have a food truck that's out there. And I think that is the example, if they were in the village, what type of regulation would we want? And I'm not sure that I want to make the owners of an establishment like that have to come and get an approval for 50 events, because there's going to be a food truck out there 50 weeks in a year. So I want to, we have to have some sort of balancing here. I did like the examples you were mentioning about if I was to have it as a private event, a residence, things like that. I think that's a different situation. But, if I'm a gas station and I want to have that here, or the village wanted for the village employees in the summer.
How about the grocery store
Yeah,
that has the Brat Hut going with their fundraisers?
Yeah, that's their own though, so that's a little different, yeah, but, yeah, they're selling to the public. So I think, what do you do about the ice cream truck guy? I really don't want to,
The ice cream truck guy has a permit. It's a direct seller's permit for food for 1 year. And at this time, if someone had a food truck, a taco truck, they want to come and they want to park on the square every Tuesday, that's what they would do. It's $50 for a year. The other point comes in when this particular situation was raised by a restaurant that wanted to allow a food truck in their parking lot. But there are other brick and mortar stores that don't want them within proximity to their restaurants because of competition.
But isn't the restaurant their competition anyway?
In the particular case of Golden Dragon that brought this question to us, she was the one that wanted to have a food truck in her parking lot. But I don't know what the details were because then she talked to Tim about, I don't know if it was every day, if it was on days she was closed. I'm not sure what she was envisioning.
That refers to item B in your development requirements, is what I was reading right here. A mobile food establishment may be located on a property with an existing restaurant, and a mobile food establishment must be located more than 300 feet from the primary access of an existing restaurant on another lot. The way I'm reading that is that that party could put a food truck on their lot as long as that food truck is not closer than 300 feet to the entry of another eating establishment. Because the way I'm reading it. I mean, if it were a hardware store, I don't know if it would matter. Is that the way you read it?
That's how I read it. So if you invite them onto your property, they don't have to be 300 feet from your entrance, but they do have to be 300 feet from your neighbor's entrance, because if your neighbor is a competing business, you get into again, that argument that I brought up previously, which is, the non-brick and mortar sellers aren't paying the property taxes.
No, you're right.
Why are they able to compete? And it's a balancing act, right? You want to provide an opportunity for both.
Yeah, but if we did something about a 300-foot range, we'd never have food trucks in our square again.
But that's not private property.
On private, it would be the private property ones that would be subject to this, not necessarily the events that are taking place on village property or on the street.
I do have a question on the transient merchant permit that you mentioned, though. I mean, would they be allowed to park on the square? I didn't think that was allowed. And sell when it's not an event?
And I would have to go back and look at it. I don't know that there's a lot of restrictions on it. We have two. We have the ice cream truck. We have Frank's hot dogs. So,
Right. I'm just questioning that because
Yeah.
that's part of the discussion. And
Exactly.
I was under the impression it wasn't allowed unless it was under a special event permit. But the ice cream truck is a good example. However, they don't usually sit stagnant parked somewhere either.
and when Frank's Hot Dogs put in his application, he stated that where he was going to be selling. It wasn't on the square.
So I'd like to propose this to try to drive us to some sort of direction here. So if we're talking about food trucks that are parked but on public property or a street, similar to what happens like on the First Fridays, we continue to operate the way that we do. We cover that under an event permit because it's there. If I'm putting on a baseball tournament at the baseball fields and I want to have one, that's part of that application. The second is if I am a roaming, I'll call very mobile, like the ice cream truck, that's a direct seller permit. You stop, sell the kids some ice cream, and you're gone. And we continue to operate with that. And when I say continue to operate, if we need to tweak some of the language, please propose language for that to make that clearer. The third is what we're talking about here, which is on private property. I'm a restaurant, I'm a bar, I'm a gas station, I'm a residence. What are my rules? And so it sounds like that we're kind of in favor of some of the rules that we've seen here from what Tim and Orrin have proposed from other municipalities. I would recommend that if I am if I'm doing a wedding, like on a private property at my house, and I'm having a reception or a graduation party or something, some of those discussions that are here that we talk about, that it's still an event permit and it's for that private event only. So you're not open, I can't go, oh, hey, I want a taco too, and I just, walk up there.
But
Right.
here's the thing, we don't issue events for event permits for private property.
Sorry,
It's only
what
for
was-
public property. So it was just written in that ordinance as there's an exception for residential properties or, where it's like an event like that in nature where it's almost catering for an event.
Yeah, so then I'm good with that. I would just say that it has to be posted, though, that it's, for private use only, like not, I don't know, the food truck puts a sign or something. I don't know how we want to do that, but to try to cut down on, as you said, the cars just lining up. But if it is to be open to the public, I think that's what we're discussing here, whether that's a conditional use or is that an event permit? And then do we have restrictions on that about 300 feet from another restaurant establishment?
Is it
Is that a
state-
fair summary of what we've discussed?
Is
Okay.
it stated another restaurant or another business?
I would argue I'll say another food establishment.
I'm just asking. Theoretically, if somebody owned a liquor store or a hardware store or something, and there was a place that had a food truck there, would they have the standing to complain about it if it
Right.
was within 300 feet?
So let's say, we have a similar situation. We have, at the grocery store, Hanson's, they own that strip mall, and then there's a different owner for where the hardware store is, and the pharmacy. If the other owner wanted to park a food truck right outside of what used to be the LTR Power, or, then, right, yeah, in that grass strip there, should we allow Hanson's to object to that or not? They're not a restaurant, but they do sell food. But there's also toothpicks in that other, that's an established, but that's then this is the balancing test. That's a brick and mortar. They're paying rent to the property owner who's paying property taxes.
I was going to say that could be an example of a place that would want to do this. Even though I get that Toothpicks caters those events that they have there, they still might have somebody who wants to have an outside food truck too. It's a potentiality for them.
So I think that's the question is do we want to impose some sort of boundary or radius restriction? And whether we do or not, is there an application required? Again, this is, if I'm the owner of the hardware store and I decide to have a food truck for a summer party for my employees, for my employees, for private use only, and not to the public, that goes back to what we talked about earlier. That's different. But if it is open to the public, okay, now what does that scenario look like? And do we require an application and an approval? And do we have a radius restriction or not?
I don't know what everybody else's thought is. I know, Scott, I don't know what you're thinking, but 300 feet sounded pretty far for a distance to say you can't be within that. That's 100 yards. That's a football field.
Yeah, that's quite a bit.
Right, if, I'm trying to think if the gas station on the square wanted to put something in the parking lot, like that. No, there's no road. They wouldn't be selling any gas then, So let's set aside for a minute the distance restriction. Do we want to require some sort of permit, some sort of approval mechanism for that?
One thing that I would ask about that, though, is when we allow a food truck for a special event, like the food trucks on the square, that special event application has a line in there that then throws the responsibility onto the event planner to make sure that those food trucks are licensed and have had their health inspections, so that we don't have to do that. And if we have the solicitor's permit for the ice cream truck, they have to provide that to us, because I don't have the time to be tracking that down. So that's the one thing that we want to keep in the back of our minds, to make sure we have that.
Well, I think, and then even if you wanted to have something about a distance away from another restaurant or food establishment, you'd simply add into that, what Lori was talking about, that the event responsible for the party or for whatever's happening with that food event, they're to notice anybody within a certain distance. They could come here and talk to us about it if they wanted to.
And I guess, though, we would also notice, I mean, if we're approving an application or the village board's approving an application, that's a public notice as well. I guess I'm also trying to do the balancing of, it's government. We're not always the most rapid responders about, I got to get a permit and I got to, so I'm trying to balance that with the, next week I want to get a food truck out here,
You don't
So
want to, you don't want to make it sound like they're trying to climb Mount Everest just to get a permit.
Well, and the other part of it, like you said, we're talking about dipping our toe, right? So having the person that's the event coordinator simply notice to the neighboring restaurants that, hey, I'm going to have a food truck here, might be the easiest initial step in that process of just dipping a toe.
Currently, our special events don't require that.
But those special events are on public property.
Okay, on private property, but then you're saying that if it's on private property, it's not open to the public?
No, that's not what I
Private
said.
property at a restaurant kind of thing?
Yeah, so 300 feet goes from the west side of the square to the east side of the square. So, there you go. So then how about this as a proposal? We develop if you want to run a food truck on private property for public use, that there's a form. We're not going to make you go to the plan commission or the village board. It lays out all the things you talked about, Lori. You're certifying, you're checking the health records with the state, all those things. And that if you are operating within 300 feet of other businesses or residents, you have to notify them of that.
Other restaurants and residents?
I would, yeah,
Restaurants only, 'cause
you just want to say restaurants only?
I'd say restaurants only, because what we're trying to do is protect the brick and mortars that are paying the taxes and all the fees that go along with having that brick and mortar, right? We want to make sure that they're covered. Just because someone's got wheels under their restaurant doesn't mean that they get a free ride.
Okay, so you have this notification process, and then is this something to be considered in approving the permit? Or is this just a courtesy notification? I guess, what's the purpose of the notification?
Them. Take the burden off of the village to do what should be their due diligence, and it would be a part of the filing for that process.
Should they bring in something when they come in for their permit? Should the applicant bring in something to prove that they've notified the businesses? That would take the onus off the village and having to go back and check.
Well, I think that I don't know that you needed something that say that they did it. You have to tell them that this is part of what the process is and this is what they have to do. And if they don't do it, and they come back to us again for a second time and say, hey, we want to do this again, well, we've had some complaints because you never did do your due diligence in notifying the neighboring restaurants.
So the question is, in the scenario that we're outlining here, are staff able to just approve this, or does this have to go to the plan commission or the village board for approval?
I'd say staff could be able to take care of this.
I'm still unclear, like, is the notification supposed to happen before we approve it? And to give the restaurants an opportunity to oppose it?
Yes.
And then staff is not going to approve it if the restaurants oppose it? I guess that's where it's a little gray to me.
If there's a complaint, then it needs to come to the village board.
How many days in advance?
What do we normally have for any kind of permitting for these processes? Because there's already something in place.
45 days before the event for a special event. But again, if it's a pop-up kind of food truck, and what, is it going to be, is that food truck want to be there for one day or every Tuesday for the summer or 4 days a week?
Either way, before they do it the first time, the 45 days would still apply.
Let's start with that, and if it becomes, if people feel that that's too long of a time, then they can come, I mean, again, this, to me, the fact that there's nobody here, and I've received no emails about this, like, I am very hesitant to create this bureaucratic process all because of somebody might be upset. Then let the one thing happen, and then they can come and yell at us, and then we'll go, oh, yeah, you're right, and then we'll change it. So I think this is we don't have a process for this. Let's outline the very basics. We've got some good examples here. I think we've covered the 3 types of scenarios. We've got 2 of them basically covered already. The third one here is I am a public event on private property. I've got a public event on public property, it's a special event. I've got a private event on private property. Do your thing, make sure it's posted as private. Don't bother us. That's what you do. And, we have noise and ordinances and all that. And then this is a public event on private property, okay? Fill out the paperwork, staff takes a look at it, you've certified. If somebody's unhappy, they can come complain.
Fees?
What do we charge for a special event?
Special event is based on what they do and how many days they're going to do it. The direct seller for a year for food, like the ice cream truck, is $50. Special events are more, but we're not specifically charging them for the food truck. We're charging them for the event.
I think we're getting really into details when we're talking about an ordinance change that, the fee is in our fee schedule. But really, should we be talking about the zoning districts we want to allow this in and things that you might need guidance for in writing an ordinance?
Yeah, I would say the things I would want some direction on, if we allow it as a permitted use in certain zoning districts, then it's going to be subject to site plan approval. Because that's the normal process for any use that's a permitted use, right? If it's a conditional use, it has to have the public hearing and go through that process. But if it's just a permitted use, then it has to come to you all for a site plan. And that process, where are you locating on the lot? Show us on a dimension site plan, all of that. If it's something that is allowed as a temporary use, that would be different. I was just looking at the use table. There's not a lot of things listed as accessory uses. But it could potentially go there.
I do not want somebody submitting a site plan for a food truck.
Can we just put this into the permitting process?
Yes, and you can interject when I finish saying what I'm saying, but you have to remember that when you have businesses operating in the village, whether it's zone commercial, industrial, whatnot, there is a site plan approval process for that business, and there's a specific reason. There's a number of parking spots required for businesses to operate based on what their operations are, seating requirements, whatever it is, depending on what the business is. So now you are allowing these food trucks, and if it's a once-a-year thing, probably not a big deal, but if this is a regular thing, this could impact the number of parking spaces they have available for their regular business versus these food trucks. So that's, I think, why Oren is referencing the site plan. But Oren, you can interject, because I'm sure you have more details to share.
Well, just that, yeah, how it functions with the site and the layout could matter because it's going to change depending on the site that they're locating at.
Parking, traffic flow.
Exactly. Parking, traffic flow, ingress and egress, all of that. Whether, one of these specific examples listed in here is not to submit a site plan, and so maybe this was intended to be more, you can do it, subject to these, and, you know, more permissive than restrictive.
Again, like, so if I'm running a business and I have a site plan for the number of spots and ingress, egress, and things like that, and I put on my property a food truck and it disrupts my core business, that's on me. Now, I think if we have I think my view of this, of having at least some documentation, is that then if that disruption spills out onto the roads, now PD can get involved and say, okay, you have a problem, you got to shut this down because traffic's spilling out here. You're disrupting the normal flow of everybody else. People have trouble getting into your business, well, maybe you shouldn't have done a food truck. Like, that's not my problem to solve.
And honestly, this is finding a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. So let's just go real light on this. Way overthinking this entire thing.
So let's start with, I'm sure there's some, I don't want to have to go through a site plan or an approval if it's some sort of temporary use. If we want to start with, you can do it. I mean, I like the restrictions, it can't sit there day in and day out, all like those types of things we talked about, that it is truly temporary, and that we don't say, well, it's temporary because it was here 364 days out of the year and it disappeared Christmas Day and then it came back.
Like Lefty's hot dogs up on 12.
Yeah. So, that's not what we're talking about. So if we want to say, no consecutive days, once a week, I'd let staff, I'll leave that to staff, to what you all suggest. But in essence, you apply, if you want to apply for a whole season, you want to apply for one. It's $50 an application. And if we get complaints or this creates a problem, then we'll come back. I struggle when we have a private property that is open to the public for some sort of business, and then they want to add some other feature to it, even in a temporary manner. I mean, if they wanted to put up a tent and, have a, for sale, these items must go.
Funniest thing about this is the catalyst of some of this is by a way of a restaurant requesting whether they can have a food truck in their parking lot. So this is just a lot of,
You guys good with that direction? And if we need to tweak to be clear about food truck use on special event permit or on, I guess we don't have anything for private property, private use, but on special event permit, then yeah, we can tweak that language through this. But I think let's copy that, edit it for this is a public event on private property, and go from there. We're not running afoul of anything else if we do that? I believe so. Okay. Do we have consensus on that? Okay. All right. Now I'm hungry. I didn't have dinner. There should be a food truck out here. All right, item 3, discussion relating to amending the village's comprehensive plan regarding affordable housing. So Orrin has a memo with graphs and trends here for us.
So my starting point for this, having not been involved in past discussions on this topic, was just, well, where are we at today, right? What's in the comprehensive plan? What does it say about housing? So the most recent version of the comp plan was updated back in 2020, I want to say. And it was a kind of quick and dirty 10-year, to satisfy your 10-year requirement that the state prescribes for comp plans. And so it wasn't a complete redo of the comprehensive plan. It was a kind of a glance at where things were at.
Tidying up.
Yeah, just a snapshot of where's the village at today. And so there wasn't a complete redo of the housing chapter from the original comp plan, which was back from 2009 when the comprehensive planning law went into effect. And so it was mentioned under the various different topics of the report, or the policy document as it's referred to. So under existing and emerging issues, they polled and found out where do people stand on housing affordability, housing availability, housing age and maintenance. And then, the issues were ranked by, low to high, where is it on people's radars? And then what's the trend? And so the housing issues were all trending up, but none of them got to the status of high on people's lists, right? Of is this a big issue or not? And so, a couple of these hit the middle of the ranking. Housing affordability being one of those, housing age/maintenance being one of those, and limited options for housing other than single-family units being one of those. And so that's where people were at when this was asked of them, when this policy document was being created.
What was it, wasn't this, a little over a year ago, Eileen, when we did this with Tim?
So the original, 10-year update to the comp plan was in 2020, and then there was an amendment via ordinance that was more recent.
That's what I was
Yep,
talking,
and
I
that-
remember discussing it.
That was the override to the multi-unit housing percentage to
Right.
provide.
And that was
exceptions.
2021. So ordinance 2021-09 went in and changed that specific policy section, tweaked it regarding housing and multifamily. The limitation was, I think, 30%, right? And then the ordinance change said, here's some exemptions. If it's a project that meets one of these criteria, one of those was the establishment of the infill development sites, which was, an amendment to the land use map, essentially, that those locations would be exempt projects from the village's policy of 30% for multifamily. And I think at that time, there was some data looked at as far as where you guys were at compared to that goal. I think more recently, through the county's work, there's data that shows you're at 39, I want to say, % for multifamily currently, or at least when that data was. And that was a snapshot, but as this data always is, that was like 2021, data from the American Community Survey. So, other than that portion, there was the community vision, what's changing, and it says that between 2020 and 2040, 362 new dwelling units were built. By 2040, the village's population numbers 5,000. So these are, again, projections of where they think you'll be.
We've already hit that.
We're at 5,000 now.
Yeah.
The diversity in housing types and numbers of affordable housing units has increased. Because care facilities have been developed here, elderly residents will no longer need to leave the village, and their former homes can be occupied by younger families. So those were, again, some of the vision statements that had to do with housing. Under the goals, objectives, and policies, overall planning goals, number 10 stated maintain the balance of types of affordability levels in the village's housing stock. as one of the overall planning goals moving forward. And again, the plan goes to 2040. So then getting a little more specific towards the housing stuff, so these are the housing and neighborhood development goals, objectives, and policies. Provide a variety of housing types at a range of densities and costs to accommodate the needs of existing and future residents. There's 6 different objectives listed, and then there's 6 different policies listed. And again, it was policy number 1 that was changed in 2021 by that amendment, and then it was the land use map with the identification of infill sites that correlates with that first policy amendment that was done in 2021. So these are the things that are in your comprehensive plan currently. Now, some of the things that took place before my arrival here at the village, there was a presentation done back in March that Eileen gave to a joint meeting of the Plan Commission and Board. This was back March 11th, 2024. And she was pointing out the Waseda Housing Summit and then Housing for a Healthy Walworth County booklet. So the efforts that have been going on in the county around housing, you've got them coming from 2 different perspectives outside of housing, right? Economic development, because housing plays a large role in economic development. So that's what that group, that's their background, is how do we improve the economic development opportunities and outlook in the county. Housing is a big part of that. The other angle was the Walworth County Health and Human Services Division of Public Health. They came out with a community health assessment and a community health improvement plan, and they partnered with Sewer PAC on that. And so that's coming from a health perspective. How do we improve people's health in their daily life? And one of the answers to that is housing. If people don't have to worry about housing, they're healthier. And so the places that, when you look at a comprehensive plan, you have an economic development element, you have a housing element. Those are requirements, and so those are 2 different perspectives or 2 different lenses that you're looking at. Some communities do have now a health element of their comp plan. It's not something that's required by the state as far as the state statute, comprehensive planning law. But it's a lens that folks are now looking at their communities through as well. And so the county, through their health services folks and this group that's looking at economic development in the county, are both arriving at housing as something that needs to be looked at further. And so you fared well in the Sewer PAC analysis of your zoning ordinance. That was one of the takeaways from their particular analysis, was that you don't have the barriers to affordable housing that some other communities have as far as zoning. You allow smaller lots, which is a good thing. One of the slides in the presentation, which Eileen has up now, were potential next steps. So you all adopted a cottage housing ordinance back in 2021, I think it was. And that looked at that particular model of allowing multiple dwelling units on one lot as a way to provide affordable housing potentially in the community. I don't believe anybody's pulled the trigger on that yet, but it's one of those where I think I mentioned to you all that in my community where I live currently, they allow accessory dwelling units. And when I asked their planner at a conference, how many of those have you had? And he said 2. And it's been several years. So
I think that says a lot about what we're discussing here. We talk about government wants to get involved with what we're doing as far as our development in housing stock and what we're doing as far as affordable housing. It's a great discussion point. It's probably great for PowerPoints for someone to talk about at some kind of conference, but ultimately it is determined by contractors and who wants to do a development in a certain area and whether that cash flows for them. So awesome to have the conversations. I think our comprehensive plan, and we have identified throughout that whole process, is not perfect, but I think it's covering enough of the areas that, in comparison to what we have in a Walworth County platitude, where we have farm fields and not less than a 5-acre lot allowed in the majority of Walworth County, that becomes a problem with housing stock, and that becomes a health issue. But in the village here, I think we're great as far as what we have in our housing stock. The one thing that I would change in that comprehensive plan, and about the only thing I'd want to do right now, personally, would be to get rid of that 30% mark. Getting rid of that 30% mark allows us to do more with our community without having a target or a bullseye on us about a number that really is ineffectual on what we really need here for housing and affordable housing for people in this community.
Yeah, and I appreciate those comments. One of the potential next steps is just that, restriction on rezoning for multifamily development. Does that still make sense? And you're saying, no. It sounds like that number isn't sacred. We can tweak that policy requirement.
I think that number should have never been in there, and we made a mistake by letting it filter in.
So I agree with Scott vehemently. It always, every time we have somebody talk about anything that looks anything like multifamily, this number comes out of the woodwork, and then we're scrambling for that ordinance change that we talked about, and this isn't, we're legislating ourselves into a corner, and if you have a developer, to Scott's comment, who's interested in providing housing stock, especially if it's going to add kids to our school district, why would we not want that? Now, we can put conditions on that, but we wouldn't want to just, no, right out of the gate, and that's what that screams. I think one of the other things, though, that I would tweak here is, there's some language, and I get why it's in here, but it talks about, control rate of residential growth to ensure that school capacity, well, I think we have capacity, and other public services, and then later on we talk about, in essence, the developer is paying for those increases, and I think it needs to be, or the valuation, we look at that within a TID, that valuation is covering the cost of those increases to services that we're having to do. And I think the third thing that's missing here, where we forget, though, and this gets to the health comment, is parks. So when we've talked about, the Plan Commission, we looked at some proposed areas for our development of the CMERT property. I think anywhere that especially if we're talking about removing the multifamily component, we've got to have those green spaces for those people to go and enjoy, that are a part of whatever those plans are. I don't know how to word that in here, but I think it's something that we need to address.
I would like to see it also worded that you could use somehow usable park area as opposed to gullies and ditches and everything else that we've had for parks in the past.
I think we've got some great parks. The challenge is when you look at, again, that CMERT property, you would need to walk, the closest one is over Mill Pond and now the Honey Creek area, but the nature preserve, but there's no playground there. We have Playmore Park and Lindale. There's no schools over there, so there's no playgrounds. So I think we're just going to have to look at that within this development plan.
I'm just saying, I'm using Sterling Oaks as an example. The parks area that we got there is really, except for being able to walk through a jungle if you want to go see what it's like, that's about it.
I like the trails behind my house. No, but there's something to be said for different types and the diversity of these. Some of them, yeah, you need a playground for kids to run around. Some, I just want a trail, and I want to, we have fishing opportunities. And I think our focus on sidewalks and walkability has improved the access to those. I saw this summer all sorts of kids with on their bikes with fishing rods going out, especially down to Army Lake, with the DNR's completion of that to get down to there, or to take our trails behind Lake Bluff to get down to Lake Beulah. And then I saw people down at the creek as well. So I think it's there as long as we continue to provide the environment and say, you know, here are the sidewalks, here are the trails. We're looking at multi-use trails. So I think, to, you know, your comment, Scott, we're doing a lot of those things to address what you're talking about. Maybe we just need to enshrine some of that in here to be more deliberate about it. But I really think that if, you know, with the 30% number needs to go, but we also have to consider then if we're adding more senior housing and more multifamily, what does that mean for the other amenities that we need to make sure that we're encouraging within the community? I know, Eileen, you and I chatted about, there's a couple of places within the plan itself, specific properties that are inconsistent. I think as long as we find those and we fix those as well, they're just they're like weird.
Yeah, I think you're referring to the future land use map where it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. And Orr and I just had a conversation about a particular zoning, in our zoning code, which is TR8 zoning, which allows I think it's like 5,000 or 6,000 square feet per dwelling unit. And it's really not clear in your future land use map where that's allowed. It's only allowed in planned neighborhoods, and when we look at it, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. And one of the reasons why this was included in that CHIP program, that health program too, is because the housing is not affordable. It affects the health of the community. It stresses these families because they can't afford other things like groceries and medical care because the housing is such a great portion of the income now.
So I messaged Eileen earlier today. I was sitting in a presentation about community land trusts. How would we, and that is an option to increase affordability, how would we envision CLTs fitting into this comprehensive plan? I think we need some guidance on that. I think the real challenge for us was in 2020, and then the amendment in 2021 is the affordability thing has really come about in the past 2 to 3 years. So it is, how do we encourage that through this? And it's not wide open, but, you know, it goes through the process, but that it's not an outright no. And that, I don't know about a CLT, if that's, would be permitted under what we've got, or we need to rewrite it, or how would that work?
One of the things mentioned here is partnerships with developers. You know, what's the municipality's role? And then in some of the documentation that was in the presentation, one of the examples given was in Washington County in Jackson. There was a piece of property that the municipality owned that got developed into a kind of, there were multiple housing density, you know, styles on that farm field, that piece of property. So it had some townhomes, it had some single-family homes, and it was Harbor Homes out of Pewaukee, I think, was the developer of this subdivision. And then TID is another tool that developers are saying they need if they're going to be able to do something like this that provides, quote, and in this case, I think they were just trying to get the homes to be like around $350,000. That was what was being considered affordable when you factored in the whole, you know, lot and the house and everything. So you can see the different, you know, there's some side-by-sides, there's the single-family, there's the townhomes, and then there's the rear-loaded single-family homes. So just a mix of development. So the partnership there is that the community provided had the land, right? And the developers want that because you're more patient and can allow them the time frame that they need to get their whole development together. You know, if somebody's trying to sell a property, if somebody needs 24 months to do their due diligence and get through all the entitlements and the planning and the approvals, the market might not provide that patience.
And I think that this village has proven itself to be that patient entity to help those developers through the process. We had a reputation in the past that wasn't very friendly to development, but we've turned the corner, and I think that we're getting a really good reputation on how we're there to help that process out. And one thing I would caution on is partnership by way of TID funds, by talking about ownership of property, to transfer to other entities to be developers, but never to have the municipality own a property, build a building, nothing like that. I do not want to be a Waterford.
We learned our lesson.
And that was not part of that example. They were partnering with an actual developer, yeah.
So did you get the feedback you were looking for out of this conversation, or is there other specific points you were?
No, I think this is great feedback. One of the other items that was talked about from that presentation was neighborhood plans as a way to, you know, they get adopted by reference as part of your comprehensive plan, but they target a specific location that you want to provide more details on, and those details can be helpful to developers who are potentially looking at that area. So are there areas within the village that you would like to see a detailed neighborhood plan? The closest example I can give you is the Seamert property that we've been looking on. You've got some conceptual designs, and those are put together by Vanderwall. That's not a complete neighborhood plan, but it's moving in that direction, right? It's, here's what we'd like to see, here's our vision, so that there's a benchmark for developers when they approach the village. They have expectations. And a plan would go even further because it would speak to the rest of the village's infrastructure and amenities as well.
I think we did that too with the developer, the owner who wants to develop the old Chester Burns property, brought forth a conceptual plan and asked us for feedback.
Right, I think that's a little different than a neighborhood plan.
Well, this would be the village taking the lead on, you know, here's what we want to see. And you target a specific area. So it could be, you know, communities have downtown plans specific to that. Or if there's you know, your comprehensive plan has these planned neighborhood areas, you know, one of those could be an example. Or if there's a neighborhood that has some of these infill development sites, you know, you could pick that as a starting point. I don't know if there's a specific area that you all feel would be worthy of having that type of investment in time and money.
What might be helpful too is to pause on that. I had shared with the board, but haven't had the opportunity to share with the Planning Commission yet. Waseda, as part of the housing program that they had run, their first year pilot program, they are doing a housing survey of 2 communities, and Waseda is funding it through their program. They've hired Vanderwall, and the Village East Tri was one of the selected communities. So they are actually going to be looking at our available property in the village and identifying what they think would be suitable for affordable housing type of development. So maybe once we get that information, it'd be helpful for the Plan Commission to look at what they've come up with. And then if there's a property that sticks out from that, then maybe that's what we pursue based on the information we get from Vanderwall.
I like that idea.
Yeah, I like that. I think where I'm struggling is what properties are we envisioning within the village that we would be discussing? Because once Belinsky finishes their development, there are, you know, other than Sewall that we approved, once they get going, there are no other large pieces of property other than Seamart, and we've kind of already started down that process as well. So I'm running out of like other places that would be large enough, like you said, to put that investment. So yeah, maybe we see what Waseda comes back with.
Start looking at some of the town properties that brought up to us.
Yes. Okay, anything else on this topic?
Yeah, I had one question. One idea. I was reading, there's development, neighborhoods, nice housing areas. One thing I've noticed now in the past, in the last, I'd say the last 4 years, 3 years, we've been putting in a lot of sidewalk in the village, correct? And I don't live in Brookstone, or I don't live in Sterling Oaks. I don't know what it's like living in a neighborhood with a sidewalk only on one side of the street. But I guess I'm looking at a development now. Is it up to the village to pay for half the sidewalks then at a later date, or should they just be put in when the development is done? I'm saying both sides of the street instead of just one side of the street.
I will tell you that's been a hot topic at Walworth County Housing Task Force meetings, and developers are not excited about investing in both sides of the street, and they're having a hard time cash flowing housing developments. So that is going to be a really difficult proposition for us to try to get housing in, and I guess we already have it on one side of the street. I live in Sterling Oaks. I walk the sidewalks all the time in Sterling Oaks and Lake Bluffs. I personally don't have an issue with it being on one side of the street, but I'm one of, a lot of people in the village.
Yeah, and just to let you know, Brookstone, I do live in Brookstone. They're on both sides of the street.
I happily
we changed
shovel
our
my
policy
side
after
of the
that.
street.
And again, it's just a thought, because I see us, I never really asked Jason, how much do we spend doing sidewalks, in the village, but I just thought a development should be a development and whole, that the village wouldn't have to pick up costs later.
I tend to agree with you, but I think we're going to have to take it on a case-by-case basis, because, again, I'd rather have a sidewalk in the development than no sidewalks and no development.
I agree with you there. It's,
And sidewalks are not part of the publicly noticed agenda, so it's probably something we can talk about at a later date. I said sidewalks were not part of the publicly noticed agenda, so it's probably something we could talk about at a later date.
Thank you for the parliamentary point of order. That's okay. Yeah, we could talk about sidewalks all night. All right, recommendations for future agenda items. Item 1, tiny homes as accessory uses in residential zoning districts. Item 2, revise application requirements for rezoning petitions. And item 3, potential regulations, information related to front yard setbacks on side-loaded homes. So I'd say let's start to pick these up once we dispense with the items 2 and 3 from our discussion this evening. Agreed? All right. Next meeting, November 11th, 2024 at 6:30. Any concerns? It is Veterans Day. Any?
motion. I will make a motion to move on out of here.
I'll second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much. Have a good night.